Good morning. Okay, well, here we are in Miss Wetherby's time in 1941, number 3 in the series. And this historical novel is now set in 1941 in England and focuses on the lives of Clementine Wetherby and her companion Aadhirai during the Second World War. The story begins with the somber funeral of their nanny, Alice, held amidst a record-breaking snowstorm that complicates the mourning process. As the story progresses, the characters navigate the daily hardships of the Blitz, including a narrow escape from a London bombing by Clementine's love interest, Jeremy, and the constant threat of air raids. Tensions rise within their household and neighbourhood, involving a conflict with a local air raid warden, nasty man, and an encounter with the police regarding the criminal past of Clementine's uncle. Yes, there's a hand grenade waiting to be pulled. Anyway, themes of grief, survival, and social change are explored as the women volunteer for war work and manage their domestic lives under the strain of rationing. Ultimately, the novel captures the atmosphere of wartime resilience and the personal evolutions of women adjusting to a world in transition. As usual, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the AI voices. And if you would like to subscribe and ring that bell to support this channel, that would be fantastic. Enjoy.
Imagine trying to maintain, this super rigid social decorum of the 19th century while actual 20th century high explosive bombs are systematically obliterating your neighborhood.
Right, it's just this absurd contrast.
It really is. I mean, the local butcher is suddenly acting like this neighborhood tyrant. The concept of a fair trial is just gone. It's replaced by people scrambling for black market goods.
Oh, and don't forget your unmarried niece who seems to be accurately predicting the future.
Yes, exactly. Welcome to Wanstead, which is a suburb of London in the absolutely harrowing year of 1941.
It really is a profound collision of eras. You have this fragile etiquette of a bygone empire crashing headlong into mechanized, industrialized warfare.
Yeah, and usually when we consume historical accounts or even fiction about this period, we're fed these sweeping macro-level narratives.
Right, the movements of generals, grand speeches from politicians.
Exactly, the strategic turning points of the war. But today we're doing a deep dive into something entirely different. We've got a stack of source material centered on the text Miss Wetherby's time in 1941.
And to really grasp the gravity of this, you, the listener, really need to know that we are dropping into the middle of a massive narrative arc here.
Yeah, this is actually the pivotal third novel in a sweeping 5-part saga. It chronicles Miss Clementine Wetherby's return to London after spending 40 years living in Bombay, India.
Which is honestly the lens through which we have to view every single event that follows. I mean, Clementine has essentially returned to an England she scarcely recognizes anymore.
Because she spent decades in this colonial bubble, right?
Exactly. A bubble where societal rules were rigid, class structures were absolute, and daily life was highly, highly regimented.
So she comes home seeking that familiar, predictable English life, only to have that world almost immediately plunged into a catastrophic global conflict.
It's jarring. And our mission today is to unpack the extreme, unrelenting pressures of this specific year, 1941.
We're going to explore how those pressures don't just, damage buildings, but fundamentally reshape ordinary human psychology.
Yeah, we're looking at that intense friction between old world Victorian morality and the gritty, do-whatever-it-takes pragmatism you actually needed to survive the Blitz.
For sure. We'll track how Clementine, her companion Aadhirai, and their entire household navigate the physical dangers, the deep psychological traumas, and the rapidly fracturing social dynamics.
And it all begins in January. But not with the fire of the Blitz. It starts with this paralyzing, historic ice.
Oh man, the winter of 1941. It was exceptionally brutal, wasn't it?
It was. The source text describes a snowstorm in southern England so severe it's considered the worst in living memory. The snow just falls relentlessly for 3 solid days and nights.
It completely buries the landscape, to the point where even their gardener, Mr. Titchmarsh.
Oh, I love him. He's the sort of character who loves to complain about how much worse the winters were in the early 1930s.
Right, but even he is forced to admit he has never seen anything quite like this.
And right in the middle of this pristine, freezing, utterly silent white landscape, Clementine and her household are just waiting for an undertaker.
Yeah, they are trying to bury Nanny Alice.
And to understand the jarring nature of this scene, we really have to look at the mechanics of Victorian grief.
Which was a whole production, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Clementine was raised in an environment where death was met with highly orchestrated, protracted mourning rituals. When a family member died in that era, the entire household essentially just stopped functioning normally.
Like, they would cover mirrors with black cloth, right?
Yes, mirrors covered, the family wearing heavy mourning attire for months, and the social calendar entirely wiped clean. It was a performance of grief that required time, money, and most importantly, societal stability.
She actually reflects on the deaths of her grandparents in the text. She remembers how the servants were expected to tiptoe around the house like ghosts for half a year just to maintain the somber atmosphere.
But jump to 1941, and all of that infrastructure of polite mourning has completely collapsed.
Totally. The undertaker, Mr. Wethheim, is late. And when he finally arrives, his formal dark frock coat is just plastered with snow because he's had to physically plow his way up the garden path.
Right. He's slipping and sliding comically, relying on this heavy walking stick just to stay on his feet. The dignity of the moment is entirely stripped away by the sheer logistical nightmare of the weather.
And the aesthetic softening of death is gone too. Like, there are no flowers.
Because the florists are simply not operating. The supply chains for something as frivolous as mourning flowers have been severed by the war effort.
Which makes Clementine so desperate to maintain the facade of a proper funeral that she actually contemplates calling her black market smuggler contact,
A man named Bird. Yeah.
just to procure some illicit funeral wreaths. I mean, she ultimately decides against it, but the thought alone shows how distorted the norms have become.
It really does. And the funeral itself at the City of London Cemetery is this stark illustration of the new reality. You have the vicar shivering violently in his thin surplice, just rushing through the liturgy.
Because it's freezing.
Exactly. And then you have the brutal auditory reality of frozen chunks of earth clattering loudly onto the wooden coffin lid. It is over in a matter of minutes.
There is no warmth, no grand send-off, no lingering over the grave. The deep freeze of the environment perfectly mirrors the emotional freeze the characters are forced into.
Yeah, Clementine realizes she doesn't have a luxury of protracted mourning. The war machinery doesn't pause for a funeral.
Survival demands her attention. I mean, she has to organize a neighborhood scrap metal drive in her driveway the very next week.
And that transition from the frozen, silent graveyard to the realities of the city is incredibly jarring. It brings us to Jeremy, Clementine's romantic interest.
Right, who is a solicitor working in the financial heart of London. We move from this quiet inability to mourn one natural death to the sudden, chaotic threat of mass casualties.
The Bank of England bombing scene is so crucial for understanding the psychological toll of the Blitz. Jeremy is at the junction of Threadneedle Street and Bartholomew Lane.
He's just had coffee with a colleague, right?
Yeah. They part ways, the colleague boards a bus, and Jeremy decides to walk to clear his head. He makes it maybe 50 feet down the pavement. And then the air raid siren begins to wail.
Let's just pause on that siren for a second. We've all heard the recordings of it in documentaries, but experiencing it on a crowded street in 1941 must have been paralyzing.
It was. And that is exactly what happens to Jeremy. He freezes. He dithers, unsure of whether to seek shelter immediately or just keep moving.
Meanwhile, a policeman on a bicycle is screaming at pedestrians to take cover, directing them toward the underground interchange.
People are sprinting, bumping into him. The panic is visceral, and in that exact moment of hesitation, the bomb strikes.
And it's a German parachute bomb. We should talk about the mechanics of that weapon because it wasn't just, a standard explosive.
No, parachute bombs were particularly devastating by design. Unlike a standard bomb that might bury itself into the ground or a building before detonating.
Which kind of contains some of the lateral blast.
Exactly. A parachute bomb was designed to detonate in the air or the very split second it touched a surface. The parachute slowed its descent, ensuring it didn't bury itself.
Oh, wow. So the blast wave just goes outward.
Yes, it propagated horizontally at ground level, which maximized structural damage and human casualties over a massive, massive radius.
It lands right outside the Bank of England, directly over the underground interchange. The text notes it leaves a crater 120 feet wide.
It's just staggering to picture.
It completely demolishes the station below, and 57 people are killed in an instant. And Jeremy survives purely by a freak accident of physics and timing.
Right, the shockwave from the blast actually picks him up off his feet. He is thrown violently into the roadway, directly into the path of an oncoming car.
But because the car is simultaneously being blown sideways by the same shockwave, it doesn't run him over.
It's wild. The bumper merely clips his knee with a glancing blow.
When he regains his senses and looks around, the reality of the weapon is apparent. There is this dark, suffocating mist of pulverized brick and dust hanging in the air.
He sees a woman in a nearby car, her head thrown back, covered in blood from the shattered windshield. It's a scene of complete and utter devastation.
And the psychological aftermath for Jeremy is perhaps even more significant than the physical injury, isn't it?
I think so. Later, when he is recounting the event to Clementine over the telephone, he articulates this terrifying realization. If he had not frozen...
Right, if he hadn't wasted those 30 seconds dithering on the pavement trying to decide which way to run.
You would have been standing dead center at the interchange when the parachute bomb detonated. His moment of paralyzing fear is literally the only thing that saved him from being vaporized.
Thinking about this, living under the Blitz feels like living inside a lethal, invisible lottery machine.
That's a great way to put it.
You can take all the logical precautions for the snowstorm, right? You can buy heavy coats, you can stockpile whatever coal you can find, but you cannot logically prepare for a parachute bomb.
No, you can't predict the wind, the bomber's aim, or the 30 seconds of hesitation that might save or end your life.
So does a realization like that make these people more pragmatic in their daily lives, or does it breed a deep underlying fatalism?
I would argue it breeds a profound fatalism masked by forced pragmatism. On the surface, you comply with the blackout regulations. You tape your windows to prevent shattering glass. You carry your gas mask.
You go through the motions.
Exactly. But internally, when your survival hinges on a random 30-second delay on a Tuesday afternoon, the human mind begins to realize that logic is no longer a reliable shield. You cannot outthink the randomness of the violence.
And when logic fails to provide certainty, human beings inevitably look elsewhere. They start looking for answers in the illogical.
Which perfectly explains the dynamic inside Clementine's home.
Because she has an uncanny, undeniably supernatural presence living right in her attic.
Her niece, Ada?
Yes, let's delve into Ada. She basically operates as the household's resident mystic. And the crucial detail in the source material is that Ada is not a charlatan.
Right. Her premonitions are chillingly accurate.
The timing of her visions is often immediate and really physical. Let's look back at that Bank of England bombing we just discussed.
Okay, yeah. Miles away in Wanstead, just moments before the bomb falls, the household is sitting around the dinner table eating pea soup.
And suddenly, Ada drops her spoon. Her demeanor changes entirely. She stares through Clementine without blinking. Her breathing becomes heavy, and she forcefully clutches her own knee.
She urgently demands that Clementine telephone Jeremy that very second.
She clutches her knee, the exact anatomical location where Jeremy is about to be struck by the car bumper. The specificity is impossible to ignore.
It really is. And she functions as this bizarre barometer for the entire neighborhood's fate. She casually predicts the demise of Mr. Peabody, a local butcher known for his unsanitary shop.
Yeah, she just states matter-of-factly that he won't see out the war.
And out of nowhere, she instructs the household to buy heaps of coal, predicting the brutal fuel shortages that are about to hit.
Her foresight also extends to deeply unsettling character judgments, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. When Aadhirai brings a man named Mahendra, a seeker romantic interest, to the house, Ada's reaction is visceral. She refuses to shake his hand.
She backs away from him with an expression of intense physical disgust.
And later in the year, when the household briefly takes in a severely traumatized orphan named Colin, Clementine asks Ada what she senses about the boy.
This part gave me chills. Ada describes looking into his eyes and seeing everything go dark. She visualizes a black shroud with broken teeth and bones embedded into it, draped over him.
It is incredibly grim. But it's this evocative imagery that perfectly captures the unseen psychological damage of the war.
So, given how terrifying and chaotic the world outside is, how does the household react to having a genuine prophet in the attic?
Paradoxically, Ada's irrational abilities provide the only tangible comfort they have, They lean into her mysticism because she offers the one thing the British government cannot.
Which is an absolute guarantee of safety.
Exactly. Ada tells them, unequivocally, that their specific house in Wanstead will never be hit by a bomb.
And they believe her completely. This detail astounds me. When the air raid sirens go off in the middle of the night, standard protocol dictates that everyone should evacuate the house and hunker down in an Anderson shelter in the garden.
Which requires understanding what an Anderson shelter actually was. It wasn't a comfortable bunker.
Right, it was basically a hole in the ground.
Yeah, a hole dug into the backyard, lined with corrugated steel sheets and covered with earth. In the winter of 1941, these shelters were freezing, perpetually damp, often flooded with icy water, and incredibly claustrophobic. They were miserable places to spend a night.
So, armed with Ada's supernatural guarantee, the household simply stops using the shelter. The sirens wail, the bombers fly overhead, the anti-aircraft guns fire.
And Clementine and her household choose to stay in their warm, comfortable beds, sleeping right through the blitz.
They surrender their rational, government-mandated safety protocols to the prophecies of a mystic because it's a more comfortable coping mechanism.
It makes total sense when you think about how exhausting the alternative was.
But wait, I'm genuinely struggling to understand Clementine's internal logic here. Her life is in literal daily danger from high explosives. She is relying on her niece's supernatural visions to justify sleeping through air raids.
Right.
Yet she is constantly bitterly irritated by Ada. Is she annoyed because Ada's abilities completely shatter Clementine's tightly controlled, rational worldview? Or is she genuinely just scandalized that Ada, an unmarried woman in her 30s, is cohabitating in the attic with her boyfriend, Nicholas the baker?
It's really the cohabitation, combined with a profound loss of control. Clementine represents the brittle, rigid structure of Victorian society.
She actually tells Ada to her face that living with Nicholas is unsavory and even disgusting.
Yeah, she complains bitterly that Nicholas leaves his motorbike running in the early hours of the morning and frets that the neighbors are going to think Belmont House is operating as a brothel.
That level of denial seems almost pathological. Half of London is on fire, and she is worried about the neighbors judging a running motorbike.
It is pathological, but it's also a deeply human defense mechanism. Clementine is clinging desperately to the micro rules of respectability because the macro rules of civilization have completely dissolved.
Ah, I see.
If she can enforce the rules about unwed cohabitation, she feels she still has some semblance of control over her environment. Ada's disregard for social norms forces Clementine to confront the reality that the old world is dead, and Clementine is fighting that realization tooth and nail.
Ada also makes one overarching prophecy about the war itself that we really have to touch on. She casually mentions that the conflict will end in the summer of 1945.
And she specifically states that it will end due to two things, H and N.
The characters in 1941 obviously have no framework to interpret that. But for the reader, and for us analyzing the text, the implication of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is jarring.
It shifts Ada from a quirky local mystic to a character who has somehow tapped into the darkest, most devastating historical realities rushing toward them.
And while Ada is up in the attic navigating the ethereal timeline of the war, Clementine is forced to navigate the incredibly gritty, morally ambiguous reality of keeping her household fed on the ground.
Because the ethereal coping mechanisms of the mind eventually have to give way to the rumbling realities of the stomach.
Exactly. The logistics of wartime rationing created an entirely new ecosystem of power and corruption in local neighborhoods.
Which brings us to Mr. Donald Cross.
Oh man, this guy. Enter Mr. Donald Cross. He is the local butcher in Wanstead, and he has also managed to become an area precautions warden, an ARP.
The text paints him as this petty, officious, tyrannical bully who absolutely revels in the tiny sliver of authority the war has handed him.
The role of an ARP warden is crucial context here, right?
It is. They were the men and women on the ground responsible for enforcing blackout regulations, guiding people to shelters, and managing the immediate aftermath of local bombings.
They had the power to fine you for showing just a sliver of light from your window.
Right, it was a vital role, but it also attracted individuals who enjoyed policing their neighbors.
And Mr. Cross completely weaponizes this power. We see him taking a physical swipe at a 9-year-old boy simply for leaving a salvage cart parked in front of his butcher shop.
There are also local rumors of him deliberately shortchanging the vicar's wife, giving her inferior cuts of meat and incorrect change, knowing her husband's position will prevent him from causing a public scene.
Cross is universally loathed, but feared because he controls the meat supply.
The climax of Cross's petty tyranny occurs when Aadhirai accidentally lets slip while waiting in a queue that Cross was previously rejected from joining the local defense volunteers, essentially the early version of the Home Guard.
Cross's wife overhears this and reports back to him, and Cross's fragile ego just cannot handle the public humiliation.
He completely loses his mind. He waits until after dark, while he is officially on duty in his ARP uniform, and marches over to Clementine's house.
When Clementine opens the door, he doesn't just yell. He physically tries to force his way inside.
Yeah, he places his heavy boot on the welcome mat to prevent the door from closing, shoves it wider, and points a finger directly in Aadhirai's face, screaming abuse at her.
Clementine actually has to threaten to summon the police to get him off her property.
This incident highlights a fascinating dynamic, though. It's the collision between Cross's new wartime bureaucratic power and Clementine's old-world social influence.
Because Clementine does not let the assault go. She formally reports him to the police, but she knows that won't be enough, so she leverages her class status.
She goes to visit Mrs. Ponsford, a wealthy, influential neighbor who happens to be married to the local Labor Member of Parliament.
The description of this visit is wonderful. Clementine steps into a house that feels like a fortress of the past, full of antique wallpaper and expensive objets d'art.
She's served tea by an 18-year-old maid named Jenny, who casually mentions she is about to leave service to join the Women's Land Army.
And over tea, Clementine skillfully drops the information that Donald Cross, this unstable bully, is currently applying to become a war reserve constable.
Mrs. Ponsford understands the assignment immediately. She utilizes her own network, contacting the superintendent of the Civil Defense Organization, who just so happens to be her daughter's godfather.
Within days, Cross's application is entirely torpedoed. He is stripped of his ARP status and thoroughly humiliated.
The old girl's network essentially outmaneuvers the local wartime bureaucracy.
But Cross's downfall doesn't stop at social humiliation. It enters the realm of actual criminality. Sometime later, the police conduct a raid on his butcher shop and discover 3 large suitcases crammed with black market cigarettes hidden under a tub in the back room.
And his reaction to being caught tells you everything you need to know about his character. He doesn't take responsibility. He attempts to frame his own wife, Amanda.
It's despicable. Amanda Cross is initially arrested, and the neighborhood later sees her sporting 2 massive black eyes, a clear indication of domestic violence.
Eventually, under police pressure, Cross breaks, admits the contraband is his, and takes the fall. He is publicly disgraced, facing prison time, and his business is ruined.
Cross represents the absolute lowest rung of wartime morality. He is despised not merely because he violates the rationing laws, many people did that, but because he lacks fundamental human decency.
Exactly. He abuses his neighbors, strikes children, beats his wife, and attempts to use the national crisis solely to inflate his own ego.
Okay, but help me understand this next part, though, because I see a massive double standard here.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Clementine uses all her social might to destroy Mr. Cross for his abuses. She relentlessly lectures Ada on Christian decency and the sanctity of marriage. And yet Clementine herself is secretly actively participating in the black market.
The cognitive dissonance is indeed staggering, but it highlights the mechanics of how ordinary people justified breaking the law during the war.
Let's look at how the black market actually operated for someone like Clementine. She has a dedicated contact, a smuggler named Bert.
He's described exactly as you'd picture a back alley dealer. He looks perpetually shifty, wears a stained, oversized raincoat, conducts his transactions in hushed tones at the back door of Belmont House.
Clementine uses him to illegally purchase an under-the-counter chicken, bypassing the rationing boards entirely, just so she can serve a traditional, proper Sunday roast to her friends.
And she escalates her involvement significantly when she uses Bert as a broker to purchase a piano.
Right. She wants a Broadwood upright piano. To get it, Bert drives her out to Stratford. The visual description of Stratford is haunting.
They drive through streets of terraced houses that have been bombed so repeatedly they look like rows of teeth that had some removed.
It's a landscape of total destruction. She is taken to meet a man named Elijah Anderson, a Jewish worker at the Stratford Railway Works.
The transaction with Elijah Anderson brings the abstract concept of the worst whole into sharp, devastating focus. Anderson isn't some criminal mastermind. He's a broken man.
We learn he lost his entire family, his wife and all his children, 12 people in total in a single, concentrated bombing raid.
He is selling the piano because it belonged to his wife, and the emotional agony of looking at it in his empty house has become unbearable.
And Clementine hands him 25 pounds in cash, a completely off-the-books illegal transaction.
It feels like wartime morality operates like a funhouse mirror. The reflections are totally distorted.
Yes. You have Clementine, this pillar of Victorian rectitude, handing wads of cash to a smuggler in a bombed-out street, and then returning home to clutch her pearls because her niece's boyfriend's motorbike is too loud.
She justifies it by telling Aadhirai she's doing it for the right reasons. The chicken is for household morale, the piano is to help a traumatized girl.
But Aadhirai basically rolls her eyes. They both know the rigid rules of their past are gone.
Clementine believes her class and her supposedly noble intentions insulate her from the moral decay of the black market. But the reality is that the extreme macro-level violence of the global war is acting like a pressure cooker on the entire society.
It begins to license micro-level violence and transgression on the domestic front.
The polite veneer of the neighborhood is cracking, and the darkest secrets are violently spilling out.
Which brings us to the hidden lives and quiet desperation brewing right on Clementine Street. Belmont House and the surrounding properties in Wanstead are essentially powder kegs waiting for a spark. Let's look at the house right next door, occupied by Miss Millie Robinson and Miss Constance Hill.
They are two unmarried professional women. Miss Robinson is a pharmacist, and Miss Hill is a nurse, living together in an arrangement that the neighborhood politely ignores.
For weeks, Clementine and Aadhirai have been disturbed by the sounds of vicious, shouting arguments bleeding through the shared walls. The tension is palpable, and then one afternoon, the shouting is punctuated by a single, sharp crack.
A gunshot.
Clementine and Aadhirai rush outside, flag down the local milkman, and force their way into the neighbor's house. They discover Miss Hill lying on the floor, bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to the shoulder.
Miss Robinson is collapsed on her knees beside her, weeping hysterically, pressing her hands frantically against the wound to stop the bleeding.
And resting on the carpet nearby is a heavy World War I souvenir pistol.
The aftermath of this event is a study in maintaining appearances at all costs. The official police report records the incident as an accidental discharge.
Wait, really? They just buy that?
Well, Miss Robinson provides a statement claiming she was merely cleaning her late father's old service weapon, and it went off.
But the heavy implication, driven by weeks of bitter screaming matches and the sheer emotional devastation of the scene, is that this was no accident.
No, this was a domestic relationship that completely fractured under the immense claustrophobic pressure of the era, and the trajectory of their lives only gets darker.
Later in the year, the guilt and the pressure become insurmountable, and Miss Robinson commits suicide by putting her head in the gas oven.
Miss Hill survives the gunshot, but the nerve damage permanently costs her the full use of her arm, abruptly ending her career as a nurse. It is a quiet, devastating implosion of two lives.
And this theme of hidden rot hiding behind respectable facades extends directly into Clementine's own family lineage. We uncover that her Uncle Cyril is currently living as a fugitive.
He is hiding under an assumed name, working menial shifts at Kibble's engineering works, terrified of being discovered.
The reason for his hiding is genuinely shocking for a family of their social standing. The police, specifically an Inspector Gilbert, have matched photographs found in a seized package.
It turns out Cyril's sister, Joanne Gilbert, who is Clementine's aunt, has been arrested for running a trafficking ring for cocaine.
Furthermore, she is deeply implicated in the production and distribution of pornographic photographs, a ring that was directly linked to Clementine's former, now deceased neighbor, Mr. Bennett.
Consider the psychological whiplash for Clementine here. She is expending vast amounts of energy trying to maintain a pristine, high-society Victorian household, fretting over proper Sunday roasts and morning rituals.
While simultaneously her own aunt is running a cocaine and pornography syndicate, and her uncle is hiding from Scotland Yard in a greasy cafe next to a graveyard.
The disconnect between the illusion of respectability and the reality of human behavior is absolute.
All of these simmering tensions eventually erupt into visceral, physical violence inside Clementine's own home. Aadhirai, as we mentioned earlier, has been carrying on a secret romance with Mahendra, a hospital porter who comes from a wealthy investment banking family.
But the relationship turns toxic, and when Aadhirai attempts to sever ties, Mahendra's reaction is terrifying.
He doesn't just argue, he initiates a home invasion.
He forces his way into Belmont House in a state of violent rage.
The scene is sheer horror. Aadhirai, Clementine, and Nicholas the baker are forced to retreat upstairs. They barricade themselves inside Aadhirai's bedroom, physically shoving a heavy wardrobe and the bed against the door.
And Mahendra isn't just pounding his fist against the wood, he has drawn a heavy blade.
Oh my god, yeah. He begins systematically plunging the knife directly through the thick panels of the Victorian door.
The auditory details in the source text are incredibly tense. The women are trapped, listening to the twanging sound of a knife penetrating the door and then being pulled out.
Every few seconds, there's a violent thud, the splintering of wood, and the blade appears through the doorframe. They are quite literally backed into a corner, jumping out of their skins with every strike.
They are only saved because Miss Robinson, the same neighbor involved in the gunshot incident, hears the screaming from next door and telephones the police.
When the officers arrive, Mahendra turns his violence on them, slashing a policeman's arm before he is finally tackled and subdued.
When we look at all these incidents, the gunshots, the cocaine rings, the knife attacks, we really have to ask, did the trauma of the war create these violent fractures in the characters, or were these behaviors always there, waiting for an excuse?
I think the text suggests the latter. The war didn't magically create the rot in these people. The war simply stripped away the polite, rigid Victorian wallpaper that had been successfully hiding the rot for decades.
The famous British stiff upper lip is revealed to be a fragile construct.
When the macro world outside your window is defined by daily slaughter, lawlessness, and the suspension of normal rules, the micro world of your living room loses its moral anchor.
The threat of social ruin no longer works as a deterrent when your actual life might end tonight. People stop pretending.
That is a crucial insight. The adults whose personalities were fully formed in an era of stability are cracking under the pressure. But what the source material portrays with immense heartbreaking sensitivity is the collateral damage being inflicted on the next generation.
The youth who have no before to return to.
This brings us to two deeply traumatized young people the household encounters, Kays and Colin. The war has orphaned them in different but equally devastating ways.
Let's begin with Kays. She's a young refugee who was extracted from mainland Europe. Jeremy takes Clementine to the quiet, ancient legal enclaves of the Middle Temple Gardens to meet a contact named Emma, who explains Kays's background.
Kays had been employed as a governess for a German family before fleeing.
The details of what Kaz witnessed are treated with a horrific vagueness in the text, hinting at atrocities too severe for Clementine to fully process.
Emma speaks of violence against Jewish girls, Cass having her hair forcibly shorn, and witnessing brutalization on a scale that leaves her soul entirely shattered.
She has been brought to the relative safety of England, but she is completely withdrawn, effectively mute and unreachable. Emma pleads with Clementine to take her in, suggesting she just needs a quiet space and a measure of love to begin healing.
And then there is Colin. Colin's trauma is domestic, born of the Blitz. He is a young boy living in a local hostel managed by a woman named Mrs. Camberwell.
His backstory is the nightmare scenario of 1941. His entire family of 12 was gathered together when a bomb struck their home. Everyone was killed instantly.
Colin was the sole survivor, eventually pulled from the rubble by rescue workers without a single physical scratch on his body.
But psychologically, the boy has been hollowed out. There's a deeply unsettling scene where Clementine tries to speak with him in her kitchen.
She attempts to deploy the traditional tools of Victorian charity. She offers him a plate of freshly baked biscuits, a warm glass of milk, a seat by a crackling fire, and offers gentle platitudes about God watching over him.
And it completely bounces off him. The traditional comforts are meaningless in the face of industrialized trauma.
He stares at her with a chilling lack of emotion and flatly states that he no longer believes in God. He describes himself as feeling like a ghost, an empty black space.
He tells Clementine that his only remaining goal in life, the singular thought keeping his body moving, is to wait until his 18th birthday so he can enlist in the army.
He intends to cross the channel and kill as many Germans as he possibly can, and he explicitly states he does not care if he dies in the process. He is a child entirely consumed by an icy void of vengeance.
What is truly fascinating, however, is the one connection Colin manages to make. He doesn't connect with Clementine or the well-meaning adults. He connects instantly with Cass.
Yes. He tells Clementine that Cass is the only person in the world who makes him feel real. When asked why, his answer is devastatingly simple. Because she understands death.
They share a silent, profound bond forged in absolute trauma. They look at each other and recognize the same abyss.
There is one profoundly moving scene that illustrates the fragile attempts to bridge that abyss. It centers around the Broadwood piano that Clementine illegally purchased from Elijah Anderson in Stratford.
Clementine has the piano delivered to the house, specifically with Cass in mind. For weeks, Cass has been a ghost in the house, her hands idle, her gaze vacant.
But when she is led to the instrument, something mechanical shifts inside her memory. She sits down, raises her hands, and suddenly they fly across the keys. She flawlessly executes a highly complex Bach fugue.
The sheer technical brilliance of it stuns everyone in the room.
It is a breathtaking moment. The music acts as a mechanical bridge over the trauma. It connects Kaz back to the mother who taught her the scales, back to the parlor rooms of her childhood, back to a timeline before the atrocities in the war.
It doesn't cure her, but it provides a brief, shining moment of humanity clawed back from the darkness.
But those moments of respite are fleeting. As the timeline of 1941 draws to a close, the sheer, unrelenting weight of these accumulated traumas begins to take a severe physical toll.
We reach the final months of the year, and the entire structure of their world begins to collapse, both globally and intimately.
On the macro level, the conflict escalates beyond anything they had imagined. The household gathers around the wireless radio to hear the staggering news that Germany has betrayed its pact and invaded the Soviet Union.
Months later, the bulletins announced the devastating attack on Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. The war in Europe has suddenly metastasized into a truly global conflagration.
The illusion that this would be a contained, manageable conflict is shattered.
And the British government's response to these global disasters hits Belmont House with a fatal blow to their way of life. Parliament passes the National Service Act of 1941.
We really need to unpack the socioeconomic impact of this act because it was revolutionary. The National Service Act mandated the conscription of single women between the ages of 20 and 30.
The government essentially stepped into the private domestic sphere and legally extracted labor.
For Clementine, this is the definitive end of her era. She realizes with crushing finality that she is going to lose her domestic maids, Nora and Celia.
They are legally required to register for either the armed forces, civil defense, or essential war industries like munitions factories.
This legislation effectively functioned as the death knell for the classic, servant-supported British household.
The middle and upper classes could no longer rely on a vast pool of cheap domestic labor. The structure of society that had defined the 19th and early 20th centuries was simply abolished by an act of parliament overnight.
Clementine fights it internally at first. She's deeply frustrated by the loss of her staff and the resulting loss of status. But finally, she reaches a point of total surrender to the New World Order.
We see the concrete proof of this surrender in how she resolves the situation with her niece, Ada.
Remember, earlier in the year, Clementine was deeply offended by Ada and Nicholas living together. But as the year ends, Ada and Nicholas announce they are formally engaged.
And Clementine's reaction is a complete reversal. She legally gifts them the massive, valuable family property in Highgate as a wedding present.
Wait, she just gives them the Highgate house?
She does. She does this partly because she realizes Ada is pregnant and she wants to secure the child's future.
But deeper than that, she does it because she finally recognizes that her rigidity is pointless. Enforcing Victorian moral codes while the global map is being rewritten in blood is an exercise in futility.
She concedes to Aadhirai. Time presses on, doesn't it? It is an admission of defeat to modernity.
And then we reach the climax of the year, Christmas Eve, 1941.
The household is attempting to hold on to one last sliver of normal, peaceful tradition. They are dressed and preparing to walk to the local church for the Christmas Eve service.
And suddenly, without warning, Clementine collapses to the floor in absolute blinding agony.
Aadhirai acts quickly, rushing her to the local hospital through the dark, blacked-out streets. The diagnosis is critical. She undergoes immediate emergency surgery for a severely inflamed, nearly ruptured appendix.
The narrative symmetry of this year is incredibly potent. Think about it. The year 1941 begins in January with Clementine standing in a freezing graveyard burying Nanny Alice.
She is literally putting the ultimate symbol of her Victorian childhood and her past into the cold earth.
And the year ends in December with Clementine surviving emergency surgery. Her body has been literally cut open, the toxic infection removed, and she wakes up from the anesthesia to face a terrifying, fully modernized future.
The ruptured appendix functions as a profound physical manifestation of the year's toll. For 12 unrelenting months, Clementine has absorbed massive amounts of stress.
She absorbed the terror of the Blitz, the moral compromises of the black market, the shock of her family's criminality,
The visceral violence in her own hallway, and the profound sorrow of traumatized children like Cass and Colin.
She attempted to process all of this through the rigid, unyielding framework of a Victorian stiff upper lip. But the human body can only contain so much pressure before it fails.
Her body physically absorbed the poison of the era until a part of it literally inflamed and gave out.
Her old life ruptured. She had to have the toxic, inflamed attachment to the past surgically excised in order to survive. When she opens her eyes in that hospital bed, stepping into 1942, she is a fundamentally altered woman waking up in a fundamentally altered world.
It forces the reader and us to ask a difficult question about adaptation. When everything you know, every rule you were taught to obey, is violently stripped away, what do you become?
Do you allow the pressure to turn you into a petty tyrant like Mr. Cross? Do you retreat into the empty fatalism of young Colin? Or do you endure the painful surgery of adaptation like Clementine ultimately does?
Human resilience is fundamentally tied to the elasticity of our values. Survival often requires abandoning the structures that once made us feel safe.
And that brings the question directly to you, the listener. How do you navigate the collapse of your own certainties? When the rules of your world change overnight, whether due to a personal crisis, a technological shift, or a global event, how do you maintain your moral compass?
Do you waste your energy trying to enforce the old rules in a new reality, clinging to the past like Clementine did in the beginning? Or do you accept the chaos and look for unconventional ways to survive, much like Ada?
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on that idea of unconventional survival. Think about Ada, the prophet in the attic. In our own lives, we all have internal Adas, those quiet voices of intuition, the gut feelings or sudden warnings that we often try to suppress simply because they don't fit into a clean, logical spreadsheet.
We are taught to worship rationality, just as Clementine worshipped Victorian decorum.
But what vital truths might you see, and what personal disasters might you avoid if you stopped demanding that the world always make perfect logical sense? If you allowed yourself to listen to the whispers in the attic, keep diving deep.